Shalom to everybody from Jerusalem. We are continuing our lecture series on focus on the Indo-Pacific as probably the most important region in the world nowadays. And today we are very happy to host Dr. Alon Levkowitz, who is a senior lecturer at the Asian Studies Department at Bar-Ilan University and a senior researcher at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies. His research focuses on politics and foreign relations in East Asia, the Korean foreign and security policy, and North Asian security. His current projects focus on North Korean military cooperation with Middle Eastern states, the economic and diplomatic relation between South Korea and the Middle East, as well as South Korea's African policy and the North Korean missile industry. He has published numerous articles in academic journals, and today Dr. Levkowitz will speak about Korea's defense posture. Alon, it's your floor.
Thank you very much, Efraim, for inviting me. The only problem is that when I started to talk about Korea defense policy, something happened in Korea that almost forced me to change the lecture. And what I'm talking about is President Yoon Suk-yeol. President Yoon Suk-yeol, and one should ask, is the end of the Yoon Suk-yeol era will occur soon, and this is, I would say, a big surprise for the South Korean people that were surprised to hear that there's a martial law that will impose in 2023, and in a way, it influenced the stability of the South Korea, and it depends on how long will it take to change Yoon Suk-yeol to resign or to impeach him. I'm not saying they should do one of them, but the lack of stability has an important factor in the policy of South Korea towards the region and its defense policy. So let's start the talk. I'll talk about South Korea as a middle power state that struggle in a way not to be in the middle of a global war. If you look, Korea is defined as a middle power state that can use its power to change policies or to influence policies of states around the region and globally. It focused mainly on economic issue. It focused on North Korean issue. But if you investigate, if you analyze the South Korean policy along the years, you see that despite the fact that they have the power, they have the capabilities, they decide not to intervene in many conflicts. And one of the examples is South Korea Middle East relations. That for many years South Korea decided not to be involved militarily, use its military in the Middle East conflict. There were only a few cases when Washington increase the pressure on South Korea to be more involved. And the other thing is that, for example, Israel established a diplomatic relation with South Korea in 1962. And since then, the South Korean president never visited the state of Israel, while two Israeli presidents visited South Korea. We can talk about it later on if you have any questions. If we look at the regional arena, global arena, we can see that there are new and old challenges that South Korea should face. And we'll talk about Seoul, Washington. Is the alliance solid as a rock? One would say, as if you say too many times that the alliance is solid as a rock, one should ask, is it that solid, or you say it in order to not to talk about that there is a problem with the alliance? We'll talk about security and economy between the United States and South Korea. Where do we stand Seoul. Where do we stand in the balance of power between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump? This was a big issue during his President Trump's first term, and it will become again a big challenge for South Korea, especially the relation between South Korea and China. Should we balance towards our biggest trade partner, or should we balance towards our security ally? And this is a big question. Now, Russia. Russia, it's a big debate in South Korea. Do we take a stand in the Russian-Ukraine war? What are the implications of making a stand? Are we, as middle power state, are expected to make a stand? What I mean, make a stand is not just declare that we support, we oppose. I'm talking about selling weapons or giving weapons to Ukraine, especially now when North Korea is assisting the Russians. It's a big issue, and I'll talk about it, especially Yoon Suk-yeol's policy on this topic. Now, North Korea. North Korea is a big riddle for the South Korean, but not just for the South Korean. And the big question is Kim Jong-un. Are we back to base one? Because if we look what happened even during the Trump administration, we thought that we might have peace. North Korea would disarm its nuclear and missiles, and at the end we are back to base one. North Korea did not give up its nuclear capability nor its missile capability, and it continues to pose a threat. And the question is, what can we do? What South Korea can do? Can it do it by itself, or do they need the assistance of China, Washington, Tokyo as well? China, one would say, Oppa. It's the big brother, and it poses economic and security threat on South Korea, and this is a big challenge for the current administration, especially I would say in the last 2 decades that China was using its economic leverage to force Seoul to change its policy towards China, or to tilt towards China and not towards the United States. Now, Japan is another important state, and the past, despite the fact that since the Japanese annexation, 1910 to 1945, the past still influence the relation between the two states. It causes a huge problem for the two states. The question is what will happen in the present, how the past influenced the current policies of both states. And we had about a year ago a meeting between 3 leaders. Prime Minister of Japan is not the Prime Minister anymore. Joe Biden and Yoon Suk-yeol, the current for now president, and they signed the Camp David spirit, which shows that they can join hands, overcome obstacles, and face the main threat that all the states in the region face, which is North Korea and China as well. Now, the alliance. For many years, the big question was who was in the White House and who was in the Blue House. Blue House was the president's house for many years, until the current President Yoon Suk-yeol, which he decided to move the presidential house from the Blue House to Ministry of Defense. He had his reasons. Sometimes what we see is that a conservative president and a conservative president, both in the United States and South Korea, can join hands, can cooperate, but sometimes both presidents don't agree on the policies that South Korea should do or should imply. We saw, for example, during the Kim Dae-jung administration, that during the Clinton administration, they supported the Sunshine Policy, while the Bush administration decided to oppose the current administration, the Sunshine Policy of Kim Dae-jung. And if we look, for example,
a few words about the Sunshine Policy, so everybody will understand.
Okay, thank you, fine. The Sunshine Policy, the policy was very simple. What Kim Dae-jung said is that in order to improve the relation between North Korea and South Korea, we need to initiate economic projects that the South Korean companies will build in North Korea, and by doing so, North Korea will earn money from the economic cooperation. The more they earn money from this cooperation, the higher the incentive will be not to start a war or not to initiate any clashes between the two states. And the idea was to build an industrial economic complex in South Korea, in North Korea, called Kaesong, built by a South Korean chaebol company, and businesses, factories were built in North Korea. North Korean workers were working there. They were earning money, but the problem was the South Korean government, in this case it was Kim Dae-jung, he thought that by building economic cooperation between the two sides, in those days it was Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un's father, will gain more and more money, and this will lead to a change in his policy. He might decide to halt the nuclear project and the missile project, and it will lead to an increase in cooperation between the two states. It works in theory. In real life, it didn't work that good. At the end of the day, the Kaesong complex was closed, and all the workers, the South Korean workers, were expelled from the north. And now they're trying to consider how they can revive this question. During the Biden administration, there was a cooperation between Yoon Suk-yeol and Joe Biden, but in a way, they were saying we cannot change North Korean policy, and we don't intend to initiate any new policy towards the north, as long as, and I'll talk about it, as long as they launch missiles and no one is hurt. We won't do anything. We might increase the sanctions, but as we saw along the years, the sanctions have limited effect on North Korea if it intends to develop its nuclear and missile capability. And we will talk about it as one of the biggest problems that we face when we're trying to solve the North Korean issue. Another issue that both governments will have to face is the U.S. forces in Korea. The U.S. forces in Korea during the Korean War, there were about 300 U.S. soldiers deployed in South Korea, but now we have about 30,000 U.S. forces that are deployed in South Korea. They are a trigger. They are an important factor in the deterrence towards North Korea and in China. And the biggest question that all the administration were asking: will they stay in North Korea? Will Washington continue to deploy its forces in the United States? It has an important effect on U.S. forces in Japan, because once you decide to withdraw all the U.S. forces from Korea, there will be a call in Japan to withdraw some. Mainly the left-wing parties will demand that the U.S. forces will withdraw from Japan as well, and Tokyo is very concerned about this issue. The cost of the U.S. forces. Before the end of the Biden administration, the United States and South Korea signed an agreement that will increase the cost of the share that the South Korean administration will pay for the U.S. forces. Seoul is concerned that when Trump will be in the White House, he might demand an increase of the cost. But one would say that South Korea doesn't have any other options, and it might be expected to increase the cost of these of the cost sharing, or it might be they might be expected to buy more U.S. military equipment to make America great again. Deterrence. This is one of the biggest questions that the South Koreans are asking, and this is linked to the issue of how solid is the alliance. For many years, all thought that it should not develop a nuclear capability. And the issue of developing nuclear capability was discussed not in public, but in under closed doors. And this discussion has changed in the last 2 years. More and more scholars, more and more politicians are talking about becoming a nuclear state. And the main issue of why should South Korea become a nuclear state, it doesn't matter if it is it will deter or not North Korea, is the question about the alliance. That there are concerns that depends on who is in the White House. Can we be assured that they will deter that they will attack North Korea if North Korea starts a war? And if you look how effective the deterrence towards North Korea, we saw along the years that the deterrence prevailed to prevent North Korea from developing its nuclear capabilities, testing nuclear, 6 nuclear tests, and developing an amazing missile program that allows them to develop short-range, middle-range, long-range missile, and even ICBM that threaten the U.S., the United States as well. Deterrence did not prevent it, and even sanctions did not prevent North Korea from developing these programs, and we are facing a huge problem in that case. Will Washington continue to be active? Will Donald Trump is sending signals that some people are concerned in South Korea, Japan, and even other states in the region, asking the question: Will the Trump administration tilt towards Asia, or it will decide to withdraw from Asia to let the Asian faces their problems? Does it mean that does it mean that we should increase the defense budget? South Korea increased its defense budget not as Japan did, and there are discussions in the security administration, defense administration. Should we increase our not just our budget, our military, our capability, and consider to have more capabilities that will allow us to attack, to deter, or to intercept more missiles from North Korea? Now, Russian is a new threat that raises a concern in Asia, and the question is: should we support Ukraine? Should we impose sanctions? And I'll give you just one example. About a year ago, the news media say that South Korea is sending weapons to Ukraine. The South Korean administration said, we're not sending any weapons. These are U.S. weapons that are in South Korea, and the Americans are taking these weapons and giving it to Ukraine. The idea was, we're a middle power, but we are concerned what might be the implication if we sell any weapons or donate any weapons to Russia, to Ukraine. And despite the fact that Yoon Suk-yeol said a few times that they will now consider sending weapons to South Korean weapons to Ukraine, they didn't do so. And this raises the question: do South Korea wants to be an active player, or it wants to be a passive player? Should we impose sanctions on Russia, or should we sit on the fence? It looks as if that Seoul imposes some of the sanctions on Russia. It is concerned what might be the implication of being seen in Russia as a very active player that opposes Russia's policy towards the region, towards South Korea. And if you look on the North Korean side, North Korea said that it supports Russia's policy and it supports Russia war against Ukraine. It justifies everything that Russia does, and it supports it by selling weapons and by sending its troop to assist Russia in the war against Ukraine. And people are asking the South Korean government, should we consider to change our policy towards Russia? Should we be more active? Should we sanctions? And should we consider to send soldiers to assist Ukraine in the war against Russia? In the old days, Seoul sent forces to assist the United States in the war in Vietnam. They sent forces after being pressured by Washington to Iraq. There were few forces in Lebanon in the peace force, but other than that, South Korean forces will not be sent to help Ukraine in the war because it will portray, from a South Korean perspective, portrayed Seoul as if it is opposing Russia, and they're concerned about the implication of this policy. Now, Kim Jong-un, the big question is, do we prefer the status quo, which means that North Korea will continue launching missiles, or should we consider escalation? And what we're facing now, what we, the South Koreans, are facing is a psychological warfare. I call it organic balloons in sound effects. A few years ago, South Koreans or North Koreans that fled from North Korea to the south decided to send leaflets with balloons to the north. The north was not happy with that. He saw it as a threat to its national security, and they said that they will shoot them or intercept them. And in the last few months, the North Korean decided to open a psychological warfare against the South by sending balloons with organic things and leaflets. Some of them were trash, and there were about more than 1,000 balloons were sent to South Korea. One of them landed in the presidential house, causing a big problematic security effect. And now they're using sound effects along the border. Along the years, they had both states use huge speaker as part of their psychological warfare. It's not a big problem. It just causes a concern to the security forces. But other than that, we can survive. And it's interesting. North Korea can launch missiles, and the organic balloons becomes more. They talk about it more in the news and not talk about the missile. Now, testing missiles has become normalized, I would say, in the last few years. North Korea is investing billions of dollars on developing and testing long-range, middle-range, and a short-range missile. Most of them are launched towards the Sea of Japan, or as the Korean call it, the East Sea. And what you hear from Washington, what you hear from Seoul, and even Tokyo, is that all the states are very, very concerned. Every time they add another very, And they, other than saying that they're very, very concerned, it poses a huge threat, but they can't stop these missile tests. And this allows North Korea to develop new missiles, to sell them, and to check new technologies. It doesn't matter if it's reverse engineering. They got the technology from Pakistan, from China, from Russia. And now they will get new technologies from Russia as part of their military cooperation between the two states. And Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo, despite the fact that they don't agree with it, they can't prevent it, and they don't want to escalate. So in a way, they contain this problem, and they can't do anything about it. Now, can we sanction North Korea? And that can sanctions work on North Korea? And we saw that there's a difference between a democratic state and a dictatorship. From Kim Jong-un point of view, or even from his father, Kim Jong-il point of view, you can sanction the state as much as you want, because the elite will get food, will get financial assistance, while the people might starve, as they did in the 1990s and even a decade later. And the leadership will use these sanctions in order to legitimize their policy by saying all the world is against us, we should unite behind the leader and develop more weapons to defend ourselves against the threat. And if sanctions don't work, and if we don't want to attack, a surgical attack, as it was raised many years ago, if I'm not mistaken, during the Clinton administration, a surgical attack the nuclear site or the missile site. The question is, how can we prevent North Korea from continuing to develop its own nuclear and missile? What are the other options? What are the other diplomatic tools? And we're facing a huge problem. The South Korean government, in a way, hoping that North Korea would not launch an attack. And this was a concern after October 7th, that Hamas launched an attack on Israel. There was a concern in South Korea that Kim Jong-un might decide to launch a surprise attack on South Korea. They decide not to do so, but it raises huge questions in South Korea. How can we prevent it? How can we use intelligence technology? What do we need in order to build our deterrence against North Korea? What we saw along the years, that one of the biggest problems that South Korea faces is how to intercept drones. We face the same problem, and Israel and South Korea should learn from the Ukrainians how to intercept drones that North Korea might use against South Korea. Some of the drones that were launched from North Korea to the south were just crashed in South Korea because the South was not able to intercept it. Can we deter Kim Jong-un, or should we accept the idea that we cannot deter? What I mean, deter is convince him to hold the nuclear and the missile capability. Hold them, stop them, disarm them. What Kim Jong-un said after during the Biden administration, he said that during the Trump administration at the Singapore summit and the Hanoi summit, is that after these summit, he said that the discussion on disarming North Korea is not on the table. Now the question is, what can we do? How can we convince Kim Jong-un to hold or disarm? And it seems that the chances are very slim to change their policy. So in a way, what we agree or disagree is that we should accept or hope that the status quo will continue and Kim Jong-un would not escalate the situation. And the big question now is Trump. Trump hopes, promises, thinks that he can reach a deal with Kim Jong-un. He failed to do so in the Singapore summit and the failure of the Hanoi summit. North Korea said, or Kim Jong-un, to be more precise, said that in the Hanoi summit, before they went to discuss the implementation of the deal, he said that we did our share in the agreement. What he meant is we did some, we disarmed some technical weapons, and we accept now that Washington will lift all the sanctions. It didn't work out. Another option is accepting North Korea as a nuclear state. Declaring that it's a nuclear state, hoping that it will become a rational state. Another possibility is signing a diplomatic relation between North Korea and the United States and South Korea, and trying to develop North Korea to assist its economy and to hope that there will be a change from within by assisting it economically and insisting that the money would be used to specific projects. This will lead to a change in North Korea. One would say it might create a problem from Kim Jong-un, because we saw along the years, in the case of Kim Jong-un and even his father, when there was a concern that there will be a change within the society, he changed his policy to prevent any change that will threaten his regime. Now, China is South Korea's biggest trade partner, and it is China's biggest trade partner. But China has proved that it can use its economy as a leverage on South Korea. You can remember that a few years ago, Washington deployed a THAAD radar on South Korean soil. The Chinese were not happy with it, and they increased the pressure on South Korea by banning tourism from China, organized tourism from China to South Korea. It cost the South Korean market few $1 billion, and it included not just the sanctions or the indirect sanctions. China increased the pressure on South Korean companies in China to leave China and to leave their businesses in China and not to continue doing business with China. Another concern is that the threat of Chinese R&D, the cellular economic industry, electronic industry, ship building, these industries that for many years in South Korea was number one, and now China threatens threatens South Korean industry, and it causes a big concern in South Korea. How can we compete with China? Another concern is the military threat. The concern is what might happen in the region and how China might use its military against South Korea. For example, what might happen if China decided to attack, to conquer Taiwan, and the U.S. forces will intervene to defend Taiwan? Will China attack U.S. bases in South Korea and in Japan, and by doing so, forcing South Korea and even Japan to fight against China? Another concern are the sea lanes, especially South China Sea and this Spratly Island. Will China use to block sea lane, and by doing so, threatening the trade between the rest of Asia and South Korea, Japan as well, or oil shipments from the Gulf to South Korea and Japan as well. Now, the last issue is Japan. The history plays an important role in the relation between the two states. I would say that the occupation and annexation ended in 1945, but it's still alive and kicking. The younger generation knows less and less about this era, but it still influences the tension between the two states, especially when politicians, mainly on the Japanese side, says something about how the Japanese occupation was a positive thing for Japan, for South Korea, and this creates a tension between the two states. A previous Park Geun-hye was the first female president of South Korea. She was later impeached and sent to jail. But during her administration, they tried to solve all these issues by putting the historical obstacles on the side and trying to move forward the relation between the two states. It didn't help them because history influenced the political factors in South Korea. Now, there is a need to overcome historical issues that still influence. One, I can give you a few examples. Whenever the Japanese Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, and other Japanese ministers visiting Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo, the tension between the two states increases. There's a need of both states to discuss this issue, to agree on the history and the wrongdoing of Japan towards Korea, not just South Korea, but towards North Korea as well, or towards Korea in the past. They face the same enemy, China and North Korea. Despite the fact that they face the same enemies, these two states have political obstacles that prevented the cooperation for many years. In order to join hands, to cooperate, intelligence, military cooperation, and the debates, these historical memories still influence the cooperation between two states. There's a huge potential of economic cooperation to face the Chinese economic power and the Camp David Accord. The Camp David Accord was an initiative by President Joe Biden. He called the president of South Korea and the prime minister of Japan. They signed an accord that says that they will cooperate in order to they will increase their intelligence cooperation. The idea was they will join hands in order to face the North Korean and the Chinese threat that threaten both states. The problem is the prime minister. Now we have a new prime minister in Japan, and we might have a new president in South Korea. And the question is, will they be able to prevail all the obstacles to cooperate? Because there is a need to cooperate in order to face the North Korean and the Chinese threat, economic and military threat. Thank you.
Thank you, Alon. If there are any questions, please use the chat function and address them, and I'll ask Dr. Levkowitz. I'll use my prerogative as chair to ask the first question. Is national unification still a goal of Korea, so Republic of Korea, foreign policy?
The simple answer is no. It depends on how old are you. If you're old enough to remember how was Korea in the old days of one Korea, or you have relatives in North Korea that you want to unify with them. But Bill Clinton advisor said it's the economy is stupid. The economy plays an important role because the cost of unification is estimated between $5 to $10 trillion. And if you look at the population in West and East Germany, as we talked about in the lesson, there were the population in West Germany was 4 to 1. One East Germany, one West Germany, and in the case of South Korea and North Korea, we have about 25 million North Koreans and 50 million South Koreans. And this is a huge problem that the South Korean people are thinking about it, and they're saying it cost us too much. And the younger generation, if you look at surveys, for example, there was a survey a few years ago, how much money are you willing to donate for unification? The younger generation said, well, $100. It is estimated that each person in North Korea and South Korea will have to donate about $3,000 a year, and it's too much. So they would prefer the status quo, but they are ready for in case North Korea might collapse. So officially, they say that they support the unification in the future. And if you look at the policies of, for example, we mentioned the Sunshine Policy. The Sunshine Policy, one of the ideas behind the Sunshine Policy was we will have unification, but not now, sometime in the future, because this is the biggest fear that the North Korean would collapse, and it's going to cost us billions of dollars that we don't want to do it now.
There is still a national unity ministry in Korea?
Yes, the Yoon Suk-yeol administration, there is a Ministry of Unification. And Yoon Suk-yeol said that it is time to close this administration and to put it in the Foreign Affairs Ministry as one of the division. And there was a political debate, but they said because the Korean unification is an important topic, we should leave the ministry, so someone will be happy to become a minister.
Okay, can you please comment a bit more on defense relations between South Korea and Japan as part of a greater set of ties around Asia?
The military cooperation, one would say ups and downs. The potential for cooperation is huge, and there were years that it was expected that Washington would be able to assist both sides to overcome. There were several years that military exercises were held only between the United States and Japan and the United States and South Korea. But it changed, especially the Camp David Accord. The potential of cooperation is military cooperation between both sides is huge. They had military, they had naval, Air Force cooperation. Intelligence cooperation is very sensitive, but they do so. And as I said, if they overcome all the obstacles, the historical, the political, they need to increase the cooperation between the two defense administrations, which will allow them to, for example, if you look at whenever North Korea notify everyone that it will launch an ICBM or middle-range missile, you see Aegis satellites, intelligence apparatus are spread in the region. This will include South Korean, Japanese, and the United States intelligence forces that are spread around the region and monitoring these exercises. So they cooperate. They should cooperate more to tackle the threat from North Korea and China, without mentioning China. But if you look at for example, the Japanese defense policy, you see that for many years they said that China is a potential threat, and now they say it loud and clear that China is a threat on Japan's security and on South Korean policy security as well.
The Japanese made a strong statement that they will intervene if China will try to conquer Taiwan. Do we see a similar posture in Seoul?
I would if no. This is a biggest concern in South Korea, that there will be a conflict in Taiwan, and the difference. I don't know if Professor Eyal Ben-Ari spoke about it. There's a difference between the U.S. security alliance with Japan and with South Korea. In case the United States is attacked, according to the alliance, South Korea should come to assist it. In case of Japan, only if the United States is attacked on Japanese soil. For example, if North Korea attacks South Korea, the United States will come to assist, but Japan is not obliged as part of the alliance with Japan, between Japan and South Korea and the United States, to assist South Korea. There were politicians in South Korea that raised huge concern that a conflict in Taiwan would drag them to a conflict that is not in their interest to be involved, and it raises the question about the alliance with the United States. If the United States defines that it should defend Taiwan as well, what does it mean about the alliance with the United States, between the United States and South Korea?
Will you please elaborate on Korea's interest in the Middle East?
Which Korea?
The Republic of Korea.
It's called business. The trade between South Korea, and if you look at the Gulf states, is more than $100 billion. It's infrastructure projects, construction projects, oil, gas, FDI, foreign direct investment, and you see that if you look, for example, at which states the South Korean presidents along the years visited, it will include all the Gulf states, or for example, Iran. Park Geun-hye visited Iran once the sanctions were lifted. It signed deals of about $80 billion between South Korean industries and Iranian industries. The Middle East is very, very important for South Korea. In the 1970s, for example, South Korean chaebols companies built projects which were called the first Middle East boom, and it is important for the South Korean economy. This is one of the reasons why the South Korean government, the South Korean administration is concerned what might be the implication of South Korean involvement in the peace process, or a visit by the South Korean president in Israel, because one would say in the back of their mind, the Arab boycott is alive and kicking, and they are concerned that if a South Korean president will come to visit Israel, the Middle Eastern Arab states will boycott South Korea. And I spoke with people at the Foreign Office for many times. I told them, if you look at India Prime Minister, Singapore, Japan, China, everyone visited Israel and nothing happened. Korea is more concerned that it might happen when they visit Israel.
Maybe the last question, does the closer relationship between Russia, North Korea, and China increase the threat perception in South Korea?
It increases, it raises concern, it increases the threat perception, but publicly they would not say it. They will try, and I think I said it, my first sentence was a middle power state without taking a stand or being involved in conflicts in the region. That's why, for example, when Washington increased the pressure on Seoul to be involved in the Middle East conflicts, Seoul said we don't want to take to be perceived as if we are anti-Middle Eastern state. it raises concern. Washington, Seoul is trying to cooperate with other states, but Seoul would be very hazardous about its policy by sanctioning Russia, for example. And if you mentioned Iran, for example, for many years there were questions why Seoul does not use its economic relations with Iran in order to use it as a leverage on Iran to convince North Korea to stop its nuclear weapon. And South Korea stated that we don't use economy as a leverage against other states. We just want to make business, and Israel tried to convince them, and it failed to do so.
Thank you very much, Dr. Levkowitz. And I want to remind our audience, and I invite you to join us next week to attend a lecture by Dr. Ai-Chung Lai, the president of Prospect Foundation in Taiwan. He will talk about the Taiwan Straits impasse. All the best to everybody from Jerusalem. Shalom.